Poor human girl was asked to sing at Galactic school as a joke, but her voice left them speechless. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The vast, transparent dome of Galactic Academy Nexus 7 sparkled under the light of 3 distant suns. Inside, a small figure in a patched uniform hurried through corridors filled with beings from across the known universe. Sarah Morgan had never felt so alone. As the first and only human student at Nexus 7, one of the most prestigious educational institutions in the galaxy, she existed in a perpetual state of alienation. The scholarship that had brought her here had seemed like a miracle 6 months ago. Now it felt more like a curse. Her second-hand uniform, patched multiple times, stood in stark contrast to the gleaming attire of her alien classmates, most of whom came from wealthy, established spacefaring civilizations. The humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago, joining the Galactic Confederation as its newest and most primitive member species. Earth's position was tenuous at best, with many established species viewing humans as barely evolved primates who had stumbled into space through sheer luck rather than merit. Sarah kept her head down as she navigated the crowded main hall, trying to avoid eye contact with the towering Zentari students whose iridescent scales rippled with disdain whenever they noticed her. The Zentari controlled most of the commerce in this sector and considered humans little better than pets. To them, Sarah was a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst. "Watch where you're stepping, Dirt Worlder," hissed Tarn'eth, a senior Zentari student whose family owned 3 mining planets in the neighboring system. He deliberately extended one of his 4 limbs into her path, causing Sarah to stumble. "Sorry," Sarah muttered, regaining her balance and continuing forward, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She'd learned early on that responding only made things worse. "I still don't understand why they let primitive species attend," Tarn'eth said loudly to his companions. "It's not like they'll ever contribute anything meaningful to galactic society." The laughter that followed felt like needles against Sarah's skin, but she kept walking. She had only 20 minutes before Professor Lyric's xenobiology class, and she couldn't afford to be late again. The professor, a Meridian with photographic memory and 12 degrees in various scientific disciplines, had made it clear that she expected perfection from all students, regardless of species. Sarah slipped into the classroom just as the bell chimed and took her usual seat in the back corner. She pulled out her tablet and stylus, determined to take comprehensive notes. Her grades had to be impeccable. Her scholarship depended on it, and with it, Earth's fragile standing in interstellar politics. Professor Lyrics floated into the room, her translucent body pulsing with the blue light that indicated she was in teaching mode. "Today, we will be discussing evolutionary advantages in vocal communication across species," she announced, her voice resonating directly in the students' minds through the neural translators everyone wore. Sarah perked up slightly. This was one topic where humans might not be at a complete disadvantage. Earth's diverse ecosystem had produced countless forms of vocal communication, and humans themselves had developed thousands of languages and dialects over their history. "We will begin with a practical demonstration," Professor Lyrics continued, her tentacle-like appendages manipulating the holographic display. "Each species represented in this class will demonstrate their vocal capabilities, and we will analyze the evolutionary factors that shaped these abilities." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Public performances were bad enough back on Earth. Here, they were excruciating. Every demonstration became an opportunity for the other students to highlight human inadequacies. One by one, students came to the front of the class. The Zentari demonstrated their ability to produce multiple tones simultaneously, creating harmonies that made the room vibrate. The Tellurians exhibited their subsonic communication that could travel through solid matter. The Vosians displayed their perfect mimicry of any sound they heard. When Professor Lyrics called Sarah's name, a ripple of amusement passed through the classroom. "Perhaps the human can grunt for us," Tarn'eth whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I hear that's how they communicated before they discovered fire." Sarah stood on shaky legs and made her way to the front of the room. The neural translator at the base of her skull felt suddenly heavy, a constant reminder of her dependence on Confederation technology just to understand her classmates. "Ms. Morgan," Professor Lyrics said, "please demonstrate a form of human vocal communication." Sarah cleared her throat, her mind racing. What could she possibly do that wouldn't result in more ridicule? She couldn't match the Zentauri's harmonics or the Vosgian mimicry. Humans had only one voice box, no subsonic capabilities, no natural amplification. "Perhaps," suggested Vela, a Meridian student who had occasionally shown Sarah kindness, "the human could perform what they call singing. I've read that it's a form of entertainment on their planet." Professor Lyrics's body pulsed with interest. "An excellent suggestion. Ms. Morgan, would you demonstrate this singing?" Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her chest. She did sing, had sung her entire life, in fact. Back on Earth, in the orphanage where she'd grown up, singing had been her only solace. But that was private, personal. The thought of performing for these beings who already looked down on her was almost unbearable. But refusing wasn't an option, not when she represented her entire species. "What should I sing?" she asked quietly. "Something that demonstrates the full range of human vocal capabilities," Professor Lyrics instructed. "Something culturally significant to your species." Sarah took a deep breath. If she had to do this, she would do it properly. She thought of the old songs the caretakers had sung at the orphanage, songs passed down through generations. One in particular had always moved her, an ancient lullaby about resilience and hope, about finding light in darkness. She closed her eyes, not wanting to see the mocking expressions of her classmates, and began to sing. The first notes emerged tentatively, but as the familiar melody washed over her, Sarah's voice gained strength. She sang of starlight and dreams, of perseverance through hardship. The simple, haunting tune filled the classroom as her voice rose and fell, carrying emotion that needed no translation. Sarah lost herself in the music, momentarily forgetting where she was and who was listening. For those few minutes, she was back on Earth, singing to comfort herself during lonely nights, finding solace in melody when nothing else offered peace. When the final note faded, Sarah opened her eyes, ready for the ridicule that would surely follow. Instead, she found silence. Complete, utter silence. Every being in the classroom was staring at her with expressions she couldn't interpret. Even Professor Lyrics had gone still, her usually pulsing body frozen in place. Trazix was the first to break the silence. "What was that?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its usual derision. Instead, he sounded confused. "I believe it is called a lullaby," Professor Lyrics said, her mental voice unusually subdued. "A song humans sing to their young." "But what was happening to us while she sang?" asked a Vosgian student, looking disturbed. "I felt something." Sarah frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Professor Lyrics floated closer to Sarah, her tentacles extended in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of scientific curiosity. "Ms. Morgan, are you aware that human singing produces emotional resonances that affect other species neurologically?" "What?" "No," Sarah replied, genuinely confused. "It's just singing. Everyone on Earth does it." "Not like that," Vela said, her translucent form glowing brighter than usual. "Your voice created wave patterns that stimulated emotional centers in our brains. That's unprecedented. Most species' vocalizations only affect members of their own kind." Sarah blinked, trying to process this information. "You mean, my singing made you feel emotions?" "Precisely," Professor Lyrics confirmed. "Humans have apparently evolved a form of vocal communication that transcends species barriers, a form of natural empathic projection." "Fascinating. This requires further study." As Sarah returned to her seat, she noticed the other students watching her with new expressions, curiosity, wonder, and in some cases, what appeared to be respect. For the first time since arriving at Nexus 7, no one mocked her as she passed. The remainder of the class proceeded in an unusual atmosphere. Professor Lyrics kept referring back to the human's demonstration, as she explained various aspects of evolutionary communication advantages. Sarah took careful notes, still not fully comprehending what had happened. When the class ended, Sarah gathered her materials quickly, hoping to escape before anyone could approach her. But as she reached the door, she found Vela waiting for her. "Sarah Morgan," the Meridian said, her form pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. "I believe you've just changed how the Academy views humans." Sarah offered a hesitant smile. "It was just a song." "It was far more than that," Vela insisted. "And I think you're about to discover exactly how much more." As they stepped into the corridor, Sarah noticed something odd. Students who normally ignored her or went out of their way to avoid her were now watching her pass, whispering to each other. Even more strangely, several nodded to her in what appeared to be acknowledgement or greeting. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered to Vela. "News travels quickly here," Vela replied. "By now, everyone has heard about what happened in Professor Lyric's class." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Great. More reason for everyone to think humans are weird." "You misunderstand," Vela said. "They're not mocking you. They're curious. Many are impressed. Do you realize how rare it is to discover a completely new form of interspecies communication?" Before Sarah could respond, she spotted Trazix approaching with several other Zentari students. She tensed, preparing for their usual taunts. "Human," Trazix said, stopping in front of her. The neural translator conveyed his tone as formal, almost ceremonial. "The Senior Cultural Committee is meeting this afternoon to plan the annual Galactic Showcase. Your presence is requested." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "The showcase? But that's for the best performers and artists from each species." "Indeed," Trazix replied, his scales rippling in what might have been discomfort. "Professor Lyrics has recommended you represent Earth." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah speechless in the middle of the corridor. "Did that just happen?" she asked Vela. "It did," Vela confirmed, her form glowing with amusement. "And I suspect this is only the beginning." Sarah's mind reeled as they continued toward the cafeteria. The annual Galactic Showcase was the most prestigious cultural event at Nexus 7. Each participating species selected their most talented representative to perform, demonstrating their civilization's artistic achievements. The event was broadcast throughout the Confederation, watched by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. And somehow, Sarah, the scholarship student from Earth with patched clothes and secondhand textbooks, had been invited to participate. "This has to be another joke," Sarah murmured as they joined the food line. "They're setting me up for public humiliation on an even bigger scale." Vela's form darkened slightly, her equivalent of a frown. "I don't believe so. Professor Lyrics wouldn't endorse such cruelty, and Zentari may be arrogant, but they take the showcase very seriously. It's a matter of cultural pride." Sarah's datapad chimed, displaying an official notification from the Academy administration confirming her invitation to the Showcase Committee meeting. This was real. As they collected their meals and found a table, Sarah noticed more students glancing her way, some openly staring. The cafeteria seemed unusually quiet, with conversations halting as she passed. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" she whispered to Vela as they sat down. "Word spreads quickly here," Vela replied. "And most species are curious about new phenomena. Your singing appears to have triggered emotional responses even in species without analogous emotional structures. That's scientifically significant." Sarah picked at her food, appetite diminished by anxiety. "So I'm a scientific curiosity now instead of a primitive dirt worlder." "Great improvement." "It's more than that," Vela insisted. "Music is universal among advanced civilizations, but most species' music only emotionally affects their own kind. The Zentari can create technically impressive harmonics that other species can appreciate intellectually. But what you did, making everyone in that room feel emotions regardless of their neurological structure, that's unprecedented." Sarah frowned. "But that's just how human music works. It's designed to evoke emotions." "Precisely," Vela said, her form brightening with enthusiasm. "But humans evolved in isolation on Earth. How did you develop a form of emotional communication that works across species lines when you had no contact with other sentient species during your evolution? That question lingered in Sarah's mind as she made her way to the showcase committee meeting later that afternoon. The grand conference room was intimidating, a vast chamber with seating arranged in concentric circles, designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and physiologies. The committee members were already present when Sarah arrived, representatives from each of the 12 species currently attending Nexus 7, along with Academy administrators and cultural attaches. Sarah recognized Tarn'eth as the Zentari representative, sitting tall in his position near the front. Professor Lyrics noticed Sarah hovering near the entrance and gestured her forward. "Ms. Morgan, please join us. We were just discussing your potential participation in the showcase." Sarah took the indicated seat, acutely aware of every eye, visual sensor, and sensory appendage focused on her. As I was explaining, Professor Lyrics continued, "The human vocal phenomenon I witnessed today represents a significant discovery. I propose that Sarah Morgan perform at the showcase not merely as Earth's representative, but as the centerpiece of a scientific and cultural demonstration." One of the administrators, a towering Cradian with metallic skin, leaned forward. "Professor, while the phenomenon you describe is interesting, the showcase traditionally features the most refined cultural achievements of established Confederation members. Earth has been part of our community for barely a decade." With respect, Administrator, Professor Lyrics responded, "The purpose of the showcase is to highlight unique cultural contributions. The human ability to project emotional states through vocal vibrations that universally affect other species constitutes exactly such a contribution." Tarn'eth, to Sarah's surprise, inclined his head in agreement. "I witnessed this phenomenon firsthand. The human's singing produced physiological reactions even in species with entirely different auditory systems. As a scientific curiosity, if nothing else, it merits inclusion." The debate continued for nearly an hour, with various committee members raising objections or expressing support. Sarah sat quietly, feeling increasingly like a laboratory specimen being discussed by researchers. Finally, the lead administrator, a Meridian elder whose translucent form contained swirling galaxies of light, raised a tentacle for silence. "I propose a demonstration. Let the humans sing for this committee now, and we shall judge the effect for ourselves." All eyes turned to Sarah. "What would you like me to sing?" she asked, her voice sounding small even to her own ears. "Something emotionally significant to humans," the administrator replied. "Something that demonstrates this capability Professor Lyrics has described." Sarah stood, her heart hammering in her chest. This room, with its perfect acoustics and expectant silence, was far more intimidating than the classroom had been. But she reminded herself of what was at stake. Not just her own standing, but potentially Earth's reputation in the galactic community. She chose a different song this time, an ancient human ballad of love and loss, of hope that persists even in grief. The melody was simple but powerful, rising and falling like waves against a shore. As her voice filled the chamber, Sarah kept her eyes open, watching the reactions around her. The changes were subtle at first, a softening of posture here, a change in breathing pattern there. But as the song progressed and Sarah poured more emotion into each phrase, the reactions became more pronounced. The metallic Cradian skin began to shimmer in patterns that reflected the melody. The Zentari scales rippled in waves that matched the song's emotional crescendos. The meridians glowed with pulses of light that synchronized with Sarah's voice. When the final note faded, silence held the room for several heartbeats. Then, something unprecedented happened. The lead administrator began to produce light in a pattern that Sarah's neural translator identified as the highest form of meridian appreciation, a gesture typically reserved for artistic masterworks of their own species. "It appears," the administrator said, their mental voice resonating with a depth Sarah hadn't heard before, that Professor Lyrics's assessment was correct. The human vocal phenomenon will be featured at the showcase. The decision sent ripples throughout Nexus 7. By the next morning, Sarah's daily routine had been completely upended. Her schedule was adjusted to include time with Professor Lyrics and a team of xenobiologists who wanted to study her vocal abilities. The Academy's music department requested her participation in a series of experiments comparing human singing to other species' musical traditions. Most surprisingly, Sarah found herself suddenly visible in a way she'd never been before. Students who had previously ignored her now greeted her in corridors. Professors who had seemed barely aware of her existence now acknowledged her presence. "I don't understand what's happening," Sarah confessed to Vela 3 days later as they sat in the Academy gardens. "Last week I was just the poor human charity case everyone pitied or mocked. Now I'm some kind of scientific marvel." Vela's form pulsed thoughtfully. "Humans have a saying I've studied: overnight sensation. I believe you're experiencing that phenomenon." Sarah plucked a leaf from a nearby plant, turning it over in her fingers. "But I haven't changed. I've always been able to sing. No one cared before." "Perhaps it's not about you changing," Vela suggested, "but about everyone else's perception changing." Before Sarah could respond, her datapad chimed with an incoming message. It was from Professor Lyrics, requesting her immediate presence in the main auditorium for a showcase planning session. When Sarah arrived, she found not just the professor but a full production team: lighting designers, sound engineers, choreographers, and cultural consultants from a dozen species. "Ah, Ms. Morgan," Professor Lyrics greeted her. "We're finalizing the program for your showcase performance. The committee has decided to feature you as the grand finale." Sarah blinked in surprise. "The finale? But that's usually reserved for the most impactful presentation." "Yes," Professor Lyrics confirmed. "Given the universal response to your singing, the committee felt it was appropriate." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah was overwhelmed with questions and suggestions. What songs would she perform? Would she wear traditional human attire? Did humans use instruments to accompany their singing? Would she require specific environmental conditions? By the time the meeting concluded, Sarah felt drained. As she was gathering her things to leave, she noticed Trazix lingering nearby. "Human," he said, approaching once the others had departed. "A word." Sarah tensed, expecting the old mockery to resurface now that they were alone. Instead, Trazix's scales rippled in a pattern Sarah's translator identified as indicating discomfort or uncertainty. "I wish to apologize for my previous behavior." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You're apologizing?" "My actions were based on ignorance," Trazix continued, his usually imperious tone subdued. "I assumed, as many do, that newly spacefaring species have little to offer the Confederation. Your singing has proven otherwise." He extended one scaled appendage in a formal gesture. "The Zentari value excellence in all forms. Your abilities have earned respect." Hesitantly, Sarah shook his appendage, noting how careful he was not to let his sharp scales graze her skin. "Thank you," she said, not knowing what else to add. "The showcase is viewed throughout the Confederation," Trazix added. "Your performance will change perceptions of humans beyond this academy. I suggest you prepare accordingly." With that cryptic advice, he departed, leaving Sarah to wonder exactly what she had gotten herself into. As the days passed, Sarah's preparation for the showcase intensified. She spent hours in the Academy's acoustic chambers, working with sound engineers to understand how her voice affected different species' auditory and neurological systems. She rehearsed various songs, measuring the responses they evoked. Professor Lyrics and her team made fascinating discoveries. Human singing appeared to produce harmonic patterns that resonated with the emotional processing centers of virtually all sentient species, regardless of their biological makeup. Even species that communicated through means other than sound, like the photosynthetic Alorians who spoke through patterned bioluminescence, responded emotionally to Sarah's voice. It's as if, Professor Lyrics theorized during one session, humans evolved to communicate emotionally with the entire galaxy, despite developing in isolation. That doesn't make evolutionary sense, Sarah pointed out. Why would we develop an ability we had no use for? An excellent scientific question, the professor acknowledged. Perhaps it's a side effect of another evolutionary adaptation. Or perhaps, she paused, her form pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as scientific excitement. Perhaps humans didn't evolve in complete isolation after all. That suggestion, that ancient humans might have had contact with extraterrestrial species, was radical enough that even Professor Lyrics didn't pursue it publicly. But the possibility lingered in Sarah's mind as she continued her preparations. 1 week before the showcase, Sarah received a surprise. The Academy's communications officer, a Tellurian with shifting geometric patterns for a face, delivered a message cube to her dormitory. Direct transmission from Earth, the officer explained. Priority clearance. Sarah activated the cube, and a holographic image of Ambassador Chun, Earth's representative to the Confederation Council, appeared. Ms. Morgan, the ambassador began, her expression serious. News of your upcoming performance at the Galactic Showcase has reached Earth. I want you to understand the significance of this opportunity. The ambassador explained that Earth's position in the Confederation remained precarious. Many established species viewed humans as primitive newcomers who had nothing of value to contribute to galactic society. Trade agreements, technological exchange programs, and diplomatic standing all suffered as a result. Your demonstration of a unique human ability, one that appears to transcend species barriers, could change those perceptions, Ambassador Chen concluded. I don't mean to place undue pressure on you, but the impact of your performance could extend far beyond the Academy. After the message ended, Sarah sat on her bed, staring at the now inactive cube. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. She had come to Nexus 7 seeking education, hoping to eventually return to Earth and help her species advance. Now, somehow, she had become an impromptu cultural ambassador, with Earth's galactic standing potentially hanging on her performance. As the day of the showcase approached, Sarah's anxiety mounted. The event would be broadcast to trillions of beings across the Confederation. Representatives from the Galactic Council would attend in person. Cultural critics, xenobiologists, and diplomatic observers would analyze every aspect of her performance. The night before the showcase, Sarah couldn't sleep. She left her dormitory and wandered the Academy grounds, eventually finding herself in the observation dome that crowned the main building. The transparent ceiling offered an unobstructed view of the stars, including the distant sun that warmed Earth, barely visible as a faint speck among countless others. Can't sleep? A now familiar voice asked. Sarah turned to find Vela floating nearby, her translucent form reflecting the starlight. Too nervous, Sarah admitted. Tomorrow feels impossible. Vela drifted closer. Why do humans sing, Sarah Morgan? The question caught Sarah off guard. What do you mean? In your culture, what is the purpose of singing? Is it for scientific study? For demonstration of technical skill? For social status? Sarah considered the question. It's different for different people, I guess. Some sing for fame or recognition. Some sing as part of religious practices. But mostly, she gazed up at the distant stars. Mostly, I think we sing to connect. To express feelings that words alone can't capture. To share experiences. Then perhaps, Vela suggested gently, you should approach tomorrow not as a scientific demonstration or a diplomatic mission, but as what it truly is, a chance to connect with beings from across the galaxy. Sarah smiled gratefully at the meridian. That actually helps. Thank you. One more thing, Vela added. Her form pulsing with what Sarah had learned was amusement. I've accessed the Academy records. You're not the first human to attend Nexus 7. You're the 17th. Sarah blinked in surprise. But everyone treats me like humans are a complete novelty. The others came and went quietly. Most were diplomatic attaches or specialist researchers who attended briefly for specific courses. You're the first full-time student, the first scholarship recipient, and definitely the first to make such an impression. This revelation gave Sarah an odd sense of comfort. She wasn't quite as much of a pioneer as she'd thought, which somehow made her burden feel lighter. The morning of the showcase dawned with an atmosphere of excitement permeating the Academy. The event would occupy the entire day, with representatives from each participating species performing in an order determined by tradition and diplomatic protocol. Sarah, as the finale, would not perform until evening. She spent the morning in final preparations, working with the sound engineers to ensure optimal acoustic conditions and reviewing her selected songs with Professor Lyrics. Remember, the professor advised, the scientific significance of your performance lies in the emotional resonance you create. Don't focus on technical perfection. Focus on the emotional content you wish to convey. By mid-afternoon, the grand auditorium was filled to capacity. In addition to academy students and faculty, diplomatic representatives from throughout the sector had arrived. The broadcast had begun, with commentators from various species providing context and background for viewers across the Confederation. Sarah watched from backstage as each species performed. The Zentari presented a complex harmonic orchestra, with 50 performers creating a mathematical soundscape of extraordinary precision. The Meridians offered a dance of light and thought that left the audience in reverent silence. The Tellurians demonstrated their ability to create three-dimensional sound structures that hung visibly in the air. Each performance showcased not just artistic talent, but the unique biological and cultural aspects of each species. Each represented thousands or millions of years of evolution and cultural development. And then, all too soon, it was Sarah's turn. As she stepped onto the stage, the lighting adjusted to accommodate human visual ranges. The audience, consisting of beings from dozens of worlds with wildly different biologies and cultures, watched with collective curiosity. For a moment, Sarah froze. The enormity of the situation, one human representing her entire species before the galaxy, threatened to overwhelm her. Her prepared introduction died in her throat as she stared out at the assembled beings, many of whom still viewed humans as primitives who had stumbled into space by accident rather than achievement. Then, in the front row, she spotted Vela, her form glowing encouragingly. Beside the Meridian sat Professor Lyrics, and, surprisingly, Trazix, his scales perfectly still in what Sarah had learned indicated respectful attention. Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision. Instead of the carefully rehearsed program she'd prepared, she would sing from the heart, share what singing truly meant to humans. "My name is Sarah Morgan," she began, her voice clear in the perfect acoustics of the auditorium. "On Earth, we sing for many reasons, to celebrate, to mourn, to connect with each other. But most of all, we sing to share what it means to be human." Without accompaniment, without technical enhancements, Sarah began to sing. She started with a lullaby, the same one she'd sung in Professor Lyrics's class. But this time, she poured into it all the loneliness of her childhood, the yearning for connection that had driven her to the stars. As the last notes faded, Sarah moved seamlessly into a work song, the kind that humans had used for millennia to coordinate their efforts and make heavy labor bearable. Her voice took on a rhythmic quality, conveying the persistence and determination that had allowed humans to survive and thrive despite their physical limitations. Throughout the auditorium, beings of all species began to respond. Some swayed slightly with the rhythm. Others exhibited their species' equivalent of emotional response, color changes, bioluminescence, vibrational patterns. Encouraged, Sarah transitioned to a song of celebration, a joyous melody that spoke of triumph over adversity, of finding light in darkness. Her voice soared through the chamber, carrying with it the resilience that characterized humanity at its best. As she sang, Sarah noticed something extraordinary beginning to happen. The emotional responses in the audience were synchronizing, regardless of species. The Zentari scales rippled in patterns that matched the pulsing light of the Meridians. The geometric facets of the Tellurians shifted in harmony with the color changes of the Elorians. For perhaps the first time in the history of the Confederation, beings from across the galaxy were experiencing identical emotional states simultaneously, all through the voice of one human girl. Sarah's final song was the most personal, a piece she had learned in the orphanage about finding family among strangers, about creating bonds that transcended blood and birth. As she sang the last verse, her voice carrying the longing and hope that had defined her life, she saw something unprecedented. Tears, not just from the few humans in the audience, but from species with entirely different biological structures. The Zentari scales were producing a clear liquid that their biology shouldn't have allowed. The meridians were vibrating at frequencies associated with their deepest emotional states. Even the crystalline cranions appeared to be resonating in patterns that their structure shouldn't have permitted. When the final note faded, the auditorium remained silent for several heartbeats. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, every being in the chamber rose in what each of their cultures recognized as the highest form of appreciation. The neural translators struggled to process the cacophony of approval expressions, settling finally on a simple phrase that appeared in Sarah's display: universal acclaim. As Sarah stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the response, Ambassador Chen approached from the diplomatic section, her expression a mixture of amazement and pride. "Ms. Morgan," the ambassador said, taking Sarah's hands in her own, "you've just changed humanity's place in the galaxy." In the days that followed, Sarah's life transformed completely. Diplomatic envoys from across the Confederation requested meetings. Cultural exchanges between Earth and previously distant species were hastily arranged. Professor Lyric's research team published preliminary findings that were immediately picked up by scientific communities throughout known space. The most profound change, however, occurred within Nexus 7 itself. Sarah was no longer the isolated human scholarship student. Students from all species sought her out, eager to learn more about human music and culture. Professors who had previously viewed her as a curiosity now treated her as a valuable contributor to their classes. Even Tarn'eth and his Zentari companions had undergone a remarkable shift in attitude. Where once they had mocked her primitive origins, they now approached her with something resembling respect. The Zentari High Council has authorized a cultural exchange program with Earth, Tarn'eth informed her one morning between classes. "My family has volunteered to sponsor the initiative." Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "Your family?" The same ones who said humans would never contribute anything meaningful to galactic society. Tarn'eth's scales rippled in what Sarah now recognized as embarrassment. Perspectives evolve when presented with new evidence. Your performance provided that evidence. As the academic term progressed, Sarah found herself in the unprecedented position of teaching her alien classmates about human culture. What had begun as scientific curiosity about her vocal abilities expanded into broader interest in human art, literature, and history. Professor Lyrics established a formal research partnership with Earth's leading universities, focused on understanding the evolutionary origins of human empathic communication. Preliminary findings suggested that human singing might have developed as a means of creating social bonds in the absence of telepathic abilities or other advanced forms of communication. In essence, the professor explained during one session, humans evolved to connect emotionally through sound because you lacked the biological advantages that other species developed. What we initially perceived as a limitation might actually be your species' greatest strength. 6 months after the showcase, as Nexus 7 prepared for the end-of-term ceremonies, Sarah received another message cube from Ambassador Chen. This one contained news that left her momentarily speechless. The Confederation Council had approved Earth's petition for full membership status, a process that had been expected to take at least another decade. Your demonstration of humanity's unique abilities accelerated the timeline considerably, the ambassador explained. The council was particularly impressed by the potential for human music to serve as a universal translator of emotional states across species lines. The message continued with an offer that Sarah had never dared to imagine, a position as Earth's first cultural attaché to the Confederation, with responsibility for establishing artistic and educational exchanges throughout known space. "Consider it," Ambassador Chen urged. "Your voice opened doors for humanity that we couldn't have opened ourselves. Now we need you to help us walk through them." That evening, Sarah sat in the observation dome again, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant or cold. Vela found her there, as the Meridian often did when Sarah needed to think. "You've received an offer," Vela stated, her perceptiveness as keen as ever. Sarah nodded. "A chance to represent Earth officially, to help build connections between humans and other species. Will you accept?" Sarah considered the question, thinking back to the frightened, lonely girl who had arrived at Nexus 7 believing she had nothing of value to offer. 6 months ago, I thought the best I could hope for was to complete my education without embarrassing Earth too badly. Now you've helped your entire species find its voice in the galaxy." Vela completed the thought, her form glowing with what Sarah had come to recognize as affection. "I never imagined singing could matter so much," Sarah said quietly. "It was just something that brought me comfort when I felt alone." "Perhaps that's precisely why it matters," Vela suggested. "In a galaxy of diverse beings with different biologies, different sensory systems, different ways of processing reality, the ability to share emotional experiences directly is extraordinarily rare." Sarah smiled, a decision crystallizing in her mind. "I think I will accept the position. But first, I want to finish my education here. There's still so much I need to learn. And so much you need to teach," Vela added. "The cultural exchange programs are already oversubscribed. Students from every species represented at Nexus 7 have applied to study human music and art." As they sat together beneath the stars, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From an orphan child on Earth to a reluctant performer thrust onto the galactic stage, she had discovered that what she had once considered her most private solace, her singing, was actually humanity's most valuable gift to the interstellar community. The following day, Sarah sent her response to Ambassador Chun, accepting the cultural attaché position upon completion of her studies. That afternoon, she met with Professor Lyrics to discuss establishing formal classes in human music theory and practice at Nexus 7. And that evening, at the Academy's end-of-term gathering, when the lead administrator asked her to perform for the assembled faculty and students, Sarah sang without hesitation or fear. Her voice filled the great hall, carrying with it the story of a poor human girl who had been asked to sing as a joke, but whose voice had left the galaxy speechless. In the years that followed, Sarah Morgan would become known throughout the Confederation as the human whose song changed interstellar politics. Earth would establish itself not as a military power or technological marvel, but as the source of an art form that transcended species boundaries and created emotional connections previously thought impossible. And in classroom after classroom, on world after world, young beings of all species would learn the story of how a single human voice had revealed that beneath our different biologies, different sensory systems, and different evolutionary paths, we all share the capacity for emotional connection, a discovery that transformed galactic civilization forever. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.